When I heard my husband say my name, followed by the words car accident and insurance policy, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't burst into the room and demand to know what kind of monster I'd married. I opened my phone, pressed record, and listened to my own murder being planned in real time. I was standing in the hallway outside Richard's study, my back pressed against the wall, hidden in the shadows between the carved wooden door and the grandfather clock that had been his grandmother's. I'd come home early from my business trip, a flight canceled, a fortunate rebooking, and instead of texting Richard to pick me up, I'd taken a cab. Something told me to be quiet about it. Something told me to surprise him. Now I understood why. Through the crack in the door, I could see the amber glow of his desk lamp casting warm shadows across the oriental rug, across the leather chairs, across the woman sitting on my husband's lap. She was blonde, beautiful, young. Her red lacquered nails were tracing patterns on his chest while he talked about killing me. "The spa retreat is perfect," Richard was saying. His voice was calm, businesslike, the same voice he used when discussing quarterly reports or renegotiating contracts. "She drives to that mountain resort every year. Winding roads, bad cell reception. If the brakes fail on the way up..." He trailed off. The woman, I would learn her name was Victoria, finished the sentence for him. "No witnesses. Hours before anyone finds her. Tragic accident." Her voice was cold silk. "You'll be the grieving husband. I'll be the comforting colleague. 6 months, maybe 9, and then..." "Then we're free," Richard said. With her father's money, the insurance payout, and the company finally running clean. I pressed the phone tighter into my palm. The recording app showed the seconds ticking by. Evidence, proof, the difference between life and death. Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You're sure she doesn't suspect anything? About the finances? About us?" "Danielle?" Richard chuckled. The dismissiveness in his voice was more painful than the murder plot. "She thinks I handle everything because I'm protecting her from stress. She has no idea what's happening with the company, what I've been doing, or what I'm spending. She's oblivious. It's her only useful quality." I stood there in the darkness, listening to my husband describe me as a fool, a mark, a body waiting to be buried. And I felt something strange rise up inside me. Not fear, not grief, clarity. Richard had no idea who he was married to. He didn't know about my father's trust. He didn't know about the $40 million inheritance I'd hidden from him since his death 5 years ago. He didn't know that the anonymous investor who'd been quietly buying up his company's debt and shares was me. He thought he was planning my end. He didn't know he'd just handed me his. I met Richard Carter at a charity gala when I was 27 years old. The event was at the Plaza, one of those glittering affairs where old money and new money pretended to care about underprivileged children while drinking champagne that cost more than most people's rent. I was there representing my father's foundation. He was still alive then, still robust, still the quiet force of nature who'd built a real estate empire from nothing and raised me to understand that power wasn't about being the loudest person in the room. Richard was exactly the loudest person in the room. He held court by the bar, surrounded by a cluster of admirers, telling stories about his construction company, how he'd started with nothing, just a pickup truck and a dream, how he'd built the business himself, project by project, until he was landing contracts worth tens of millions. He was 40 years old, handsome in that confident, slightly predatory way some successful men cultivate, wearing a tuxedo that fit like it was sewn onto his body. When he approached me, I was standing by the window, looking out at Central Park. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said. I turned to face him, tall, blue eyes, silver at his temples that made him look distinguished, a smile designed to make women feel special. I was just thinking about how many of these people actually care about the cause. And you do? My father started this foundation, so yes, I care. Something shifted in his expression. Interest, maybe, or calculation, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. Then we should talk, he said. I'm Richard Carter. I donate to causes I believe in, and I'd love to hear more about what you believe in. He was charming, attentive. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He made me laugh. He referenced books I'd mentioned in passing weeks later, proving he'd been paying attention. He sent flowers after our first date. Not roses, but lilies, because I'd mentioned once that roses were overdone. We were married 18 months later. I was 29. My father walked me down the aisle, already starting to show signs of the illness that would take him 3 years later. Richard gave a toast about how I'd completed him, how I was the missing piece he hadn't known he was looking for. It was a beautiful wedding. Everyone said so. What they didn't see was the way Richard's grip tightened on my arm when I talked too long with another man at the reception. The way he suggested, so gently, that I didn't really need to keep working at the foundation now that he could provide for us. The way he began handling all the finances because he didn't want me to worry. The erosion was gradual, so slow I barely noticed until I was already underwater. Richard made the decisions about our home, our investments, our social calendar. He explained everything as protection, love. I just want to take care of you. And because I'd watched my parents have a traditional marriage, because I wanted to be supportive. Because I was 29 and maybe didn't trust myself as much as I should have, I let him. But something in me stayed alert. Some deep instinct kept me from giving him everything. When my father died 5 years ago, leaving me $40 million in trust, I didn't tell Richard. Not directly, not completely. My father had structured the inheritance specifically to protect it from creditors, divorces, and, as he'd put it, anyone who might not have your best interests at heart. The money was held in a trust managed by Marcus Webb, my father's attorney and my godfather. Only Marcus and I knew the full scope. I told Richard that my father had left some assets that were tied up in probate and complicated. He nodded, offered his condolences, and never asked follow-up questions. Why would he? He controlled our finances. He assumed that meant he controlled me. That was his first mistake. Over the 5 years that followed, I watched Richard carefully. I didn't snoop through his things or hire private investigators. I just paid attention to the way he talked about his business, always problems, always struggles, never quite as successful as he wanted me to believe. To the late nights at the office that smelled like unfamiliar perfume when he came home. To the occasional flash of cold contempt in his eyes when he thought I wasn't watching. And I began to move. Through a holding company Marcus set up, I started buying shares in Richard's construction firm. Not dramatically, not obviously. Just steady acquisitions over time, whenever smaller investors wanted to sell. I also bought up portions of his debt, the loans he'd taken to keep the company afloat, the credit lines he'd stretched past their limits. By the time I stood outside his study door, listening to him plan my murder, I owned 51% of Carter Construction. I was his largest creditor, and he had no idea. The recording on my phone ticked past 15 minutes. I had everything I needed. Richard's voice drifted through the door. Let's go over the timeline again. She leaves for the spa on the 15th. You meet me here that morning. We'll finalize everything. The car will be ready. We'll have perfect alibis. And the mechanic? Victoria asked. Handled. Paid in cash. No connection to us. I heard fabric rustling, the sound of a kiss. "I should go," Victoria said. "We shouldn't be seen together too much before, you know." "I know. Use the back gate. I'll text you tomorrow." I heard her stand, heard footsteps approaching the door. I moved silently down the hallway, slipping into the coat closet near the entrance, holding my breath as Victoria walked past in her expensive heels. She didn't see me. She was checking her phone, smiling at something on the screen, probably already anticipating the fortune she thought she was about to steal. The front door opened and closed. I counted to 60 before emerging. Richard was still in his study. I could see through the partially open door that he'd poured himself a scotch and was standing at the window, looking out at the garden with an expression of total satisfaction. He had no idea I was in the house. No idea I'd heard everything. No idea that his world was about to collapse. I walked silently back through the kitchen, out the side door, and around to where I'd left my suitcase by the front steps. I picked it up, walked back in through the front door, and called out, "Richard? I'm home. My flight was canceled, so I got an earlier one." I heard him set down his glass, heard his footsteps crossing the marble foyer. And then he was there, arms outstretched, face arranged into an expression of delight. "Danielle, what a wonderful surprise!" He wrapped me in a hug, pressing his lips to my forehead. "I missed you." I hugged him back. I smiled. I told him I'd missed him too. And I felt absolutely nothing but the cold steel of the trap I was about to spring. I didn't sleep that night. I lay beside Richard in our king-sized bed, listening to his breathing slow into the easy rhythm of someone with no conscience. He'd fallen asleep almost immediately, one arm thrown casually over my hip in a parody of affection. I stared at the ceiling and planned. At 6 a.m., while Richard was still sleeping, I took my phone into the bathroom and played the recording again with the volume low. I needed to be sure I hadn't imagined it. I needed to hear the words. Car accident, insurance policy, brakes fail, tragic accident. We're free. It was real, all of it. I got dressed quietly, slacks, a silk blouse, the clothes of a woman going to brunch with friends, and told Richard I had plans. He barely looked up from his phone. "Have fun, honey. I've got a golf game at 10. I kissed his cheek and walked out the front door. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Marcus Webb's office on the 42nd floor of a building my father had once owned. Marcus was 63 years old, with silver hair and dark eyes that had seen every kind of human betrayal over his 40 years in law. He'd handled my father's business affairs for decades. He'd drawn up the trust that protected my inheritance. He was the only person I trusted completely. "Danielle," he rose to greet me, concern crossing his distinguished features. "Your message said it was urgent. What's wrong?" I set my phone on his desk and pressed play. For the next 15 minutes, Marcus sat in absolute stillness, listening to Richard and Victoria plan my murder. His face showed no expression. He was too experienced for that. But his hands, folded on the desk in front of him, tightened until the knuckles went pale. When the recording ended, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me. "How are you so calm?" "Because I've been expecting something like this for years. Not this specifically, but something." I met his gaze. "I knew something was wrong with him, Marcus. I've known for a long time. That's why I never told him about the inheritance. That's why I've been buying his company out from under him." Marcus nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now I go to the FBI. Now we build a case. And now I take everything he has while he sits in a prison cell for the rest of his life." "You could just report him, let the authorities handle it, walk away." "I could." I leaned forward. "But that's not enough. He was going to kill me, Marcus. He was going to kill me and take my father's money and live happily ever after with that woman. I'm not going to just survive this. I'm going to make sure he loses everything he ever cared about, his freedom, his company, his reputation. And I'm going to make sure he knows I'm the one who did it." Marcus studied me for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. "Your father would be proud of you." "I know." Marcus asked me what I wanted. Survival? Justice? I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. I want him to watch me take everything, and then I want him in a cell. "Then we'd better get to work." The FBI field office in Manhattan was exactly as intimidating as you'd expect, a fortress of concrete and security checkpoints designed to make everyone who entered feel like they were already under investigation. I arrived at 9 a.m., 2 days after the recording, with Marcus beside me. We'd spent the intervening time preparing, copying the audio file, documenting the timeline, gathering every piece of evidence about Richard's company that might be relevant. Agent Maria Torres met us in a conference room on the 7th floor. She was in her mid-40s, with sharp, dark eyes and the demeanor of someone who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. Her partner, Agent David Kim, was younger, maybe mid-30s, with a quiet intensity that suggested he was smarter than he let on. I placed my phone on the table and pressed play. The recording filled the room. Richard's voice, Victoria's laugh, the casual discussion of murder. When it ended, Agent Torres looked at Agent Kim. Something passed between them, a signal, a confirmation. "Mrs. Carter," Torres said, turning back to me, "how long have you known about this?" "I recorded it 4 days ago. I came home early from a trip and overheard them in my husband's study." "And you didn't confront him? Didn't run?" "No." "Why not?" I considered the question carefully before answering. "Because I'm not finished with him yet." Torres raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" Marcus slid a folder across the table. "My client is the majority shareholder of her husband's company. Through legitimate investments over the past 5 years, she's acquired 51% of Carter Construction. She's also the primary holder of the company's debt." Kim picked up the folder and started flipping through. His eyes widened slightly. "He doesn't know about any of this?" "Not a thing," I said. "He thinks I'm a naive housewife who doesn't understand finances. He's been planning my murder while I've been preparing his bankruptcy." Torres leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Carter, this is unusual." "I'm aware. Most people in your situation would be in a safe house by now, terrified, traumatized." "I am terrified," I said honestly. "But I'm also furious. And I've learned that fury is more useful than fear when channeled correctly." Torres studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to open an investigation into your husband and this woman, Victoria? I don't know her last name yet." "We'll find it. Based on the recording, we have probable cause for conspiracy to commit murder. We'll put him under surveillance. We'll monitor his communications. We'll build an airtight case." "How long will that take?" "Depends on what we find. Could be weeks, could be months." "The spa retreat he's planning. That's supposed to happen on the 15th. That's 3 weeks from now." Kim made a note. "So we have a timeline. They're planning to act on the 15th. "Which means," Torres said, "we have 3 weeks to catch them in the act." A chill ran through me, despite my composure. In the act? If we can document them actually tampering with your car, actually implementing the plan, the case becomes much stronger. First-degree attempted murder instead of just conspiracy. "You want me to let them think they're getting away with it?" I want you to go home, Mrs. Carter. Go back to your life. Pretend everything is normal. Let your husband think he's still in control. Torres leaned forward, her expression intense. Can you do that? I thought about lying beside Richard every night, eating breakfast with him every morning, kissing him goodbye while knowing exactly what he was planning. Yes, I said, I can do that. Agent Torres looked at me with something like respect. Mrs. Carter, most people in your position would have confronted him by now, or run. You didn't do either. I smiled. That's because I'm not done yet. The drive back to the Upper East Side felt like entering enemy territory. I sat in the back of the town car, watching Manhattan slide past the windows, trying to prepare myself for the performance ahead. For the next 3 weeks, I had to be the perfect, unsuspecting wife, the clueless spouse who didn't notice anything wrong, the victim in waiting. It was the role Richard had written for me. I was going to play it perfectly, and then I was going to burn the entire script. The house looked the same as always when I arrived, brownstone facade, ivy climbing the walls, the kind of home that whispered old money and good taste. I decorated it myself, years ago, back when I thought I was building a life. Now I saw it for what it was, a mausoleum, a monument to a marriage that had been dead for years. Richard was in the living room when I entered, scrolling through something on his tablet. He looked up with that practiced smile, the one I now recognized as purely performative. Hey, honey, how was brunch? Lovely. Sarah says hello. Good, good. He patted the cushion beside him. Come sit. I want to talk to you about something. I set my purse down and settled onto the sofa, close enough to seem affectionate, far enough to maintain control. What's on your mind? I was thinking about that spa retreat you mentioned, the one in the mountains. Every muscle in my body tensed. I kept my face neutral. I know you've been stressed lately, he continued, reaching over to take my hand. Work stuff, all the chaos at the foundation. I think you deserve a real break. A week in the mountains, no phones, no interruptions, just you and nature. His thumb traced circles on my palm, the same hand that would tamper with my brakes. That sounds perfect, honey, I said, squeezing his hand. I could really use the relaxation. I thought so. I'll book it for the 15th, give you something to look forward to. The 15th, perfect. He lifted my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles. I just want you to be happy, Danielle. That's all I've ever wanted. I looked into his eyes, those blue eyes that had charmed me a decade ago, and saw nothing but a stranger. I know, I said softly, and I love you for it. That night, he kissed my forehead like he loved me. I kissed him back like I didn't know. We were both lying, but only one of us was going to get caught. The days that followed were an exercise in controlled performance. Every morning, I woke up beside Richard and pretended everything was normal. I made coffee. I discussed the news. I asked about his work and listened to his lies with an expression of supportive interest. Every evening, I sat across from him at dinner and made small talk about the foundation, about our friends, about the spa trip he'd so thoughtfully booked. He was more attentive than he'd been in years, complimenting my clothes, suggesting date nights, touching my shoulder as he passed behind my chair, building his alibi, brick by brick. And every night I lay awake while he slept, running through the details of my plan. Agent Torres checked in daily via a secure phone she'd given me. The investigation was progressing. They'd identified Victoria Chen, 32 years old, former medical device sales rep. Her employment history was spotty, her relationship history was worse. 2 previous boyfriends had died in accidents, one a fall from a balcony, one a car crash on a rainy night. Both had substantial life insurance policies. Both had named Victoria as a beneficiary. Neither case had ever been prosecuted. Agent Kim showed me the file during one of our clandestine meetings, held at a secure location downtown, while Richard thought I was at my yoga class. "She's a black widow," Kim said, sliding photographs across the table. "The pattern is clear in retrospect, but she's been careful. Different cities, different methods, enough time in between that nobody connected the dots." I looked at the faces of the dead men, Michael Cross, Jonathan Webb. Both had once smiled at Victoria the way Richard did. Both had thought they were in control. And Richard is just her latest mark? "That's our assessment," Torres said. "She targeted him for his company and his wife's perceived wealth. She didn't know about your hidden assets. She just saw what Richard told her, a successful businessman married to an heiress. So she manipulated him into killing me. Or collaborated with him. It's hard to say who originated the plan, but it doesn't matter legally. They're both going down." I looked at the photographs again. 2 women whose deaths had never been avenged. 2 families who'd never gotten answers. "I want to help build the case," I said, "not just be bait. I want to make sure you have everything you need to put them away forever." Torres nodded slowly. "You've already given us a lot, but there might be more you can do. Access to his home office, his computer, financial records he keeps off the books. I can get you anything. Just be careful. If he suspects anything, he won't." I smiled grimly. He's too arrogant to imagine I'm capable of this. Over the next week, I became a ghost in my own home, moving through rooms I knew better than Richard did, finding things he'd hidden because he never imagined I'd look. I photographed documents in his study while he slept. I made copies of his hard drives while he was at golf. I compiled a shadow record of every lie he'd ever told about his finances, the embezzled funds, the bribery payments, the construction shortcuts that had put lives at risk. And I met with Marcus to finalize the corporate takedown. Richard's company was in worse shape than even I had realized. He'd been hiding losses for years, moving money between accounts to obscure the bleeding, paying bribes to inspectors who overlooked substandard work. The liability exposure was staggering. If even one of his buildings failed, the lawsuits would destroy him. "He's been propping up a corpse," Marcus said, reviewing the forensic accounting report. "The company should have gone bankrupt 2 years ago. He's been stealing from Peter to pay Paul, betting on your father's inheritance to bail him out. And instead of asking for my help, he decided to kill me for it." The math made sense to him. Dead wife means life insurance plus inheritance, no messy divorce, no questions about his mismanagement. He could pay off the debts, cover his tracks, and start fresh. I stared at the numbers on the page. Millions of dollars of fraud, years of deception, lives potentially endangered by his corner cutting. When this goes public, what happens to the company? Probable criminal charges for fraud in addition to the attempted murder. The board will be forced to take action. As majority shareholder, you have the right to call an emergency meeting, remove Richard from leadership, and initiate a full audit. "Do it," I said. "Set up the meeting for the day after the 15th. "You're sure you want to wait that long? We could move sooner." "I want him caught in the act first. I want video of him tampering with my car. I want the murder charge to be unimpeachable." I closed the folder of financial documents. And then, while he's sitting in a holding cell processing what just happened, I want to walk into his company and take it from him. Marcus studied me for a moment. "You've thought this through. Every detail, for months. Your father really would be proud." "I know he would. That's why I have to do this right." While Richard was texting Victoria about brake mechanics, I was signing the document that would strip him of everything he thought he owned. He had no idea. he still thought he was the one in control. The 15th arrived on a Thursday. I woke that morning before dawn, watching Richard's face in the gray light filtering through our bedroom curtains. He looked peaceful in sleep, almost innocent. It was strange to think that in a few hours, his entire world would collapse. I'd packed my suitcase the night before, just as I would have for a real spa trip. I double-checked the arrangements with Agent Torres. Everything was in place. At 7 a.m., Richard came downstairs in his bathrobe, coffee in hand, the picture of domestic normalcy. "Big day," he said cheerfully. "Ready for your mountain retreat?" "I can't wait. I've been so stressed lately. This is exactly what I need." "You deserve it." He kissed my cheek. "Drive safe, okay? Those mountain roads can be tricky." I smiled. I'm always careful. I loaded my suitcase into my BMW, the silver X5 that Richard had bought me for our anniversary, the one he'd soon be tampering with. I hugged him goodbye at the front door. I waved as I backed out of the driveway. And then I drove exactly 3 blocks, turned into an underground parking garage, and switched to an unmarked FBI vehicle. Agent Torres was waiting in the back seat. "How are you feeling?" Focused, I buckled my seatbelt. "Where are we going?" "Surveillance position. We've got eyes on your house. Your car is fitted with cameras, motion activated, hidden in the dash. When they make their move, we'll have everything." We drove to a hotel on the Upper West Side, different enough from my usual neighborhood that I wouldn't be recognized, close enough that the FBI team could respond quickly when needed. The room was standard government issue, bland furniture, blackout curtains, a table covered with laptops and surveillance equipment. Agent Kim was already there, monitoring feeds from multiple cameras. Subject 1, that's your husband, is still at the residence. Subject 2, Victoria, is on her way. ETA about 20 minutes based on traffic. I sat down at the table, watching the grainy feed of my own home, my own driveway, my own car, sitting innocently where I'd left it. "Now we wait," Torres said. The next 2 hours were simultaneously the longest and shortest of my life. Victoria arrived at 9:45 a.m. I watched her pull up in a black Audi, park behind Richard's Mercedes, and walk confidently to the front door. She was dressed casually, jeans, a leather jacket, hair pulled back. The outfit of someone planning to get her hands dirty. Richard opened the door immediately. They embraced in the foyer, kissed, and disappeared inside. "Audio's active," Kim said, adjusting his headphones. "They're in the kitchen, talking about the plan." I heard fragments through the speakers, Richard's voice, Victoria's laugh, references to tools and timing. My stomach churned, but I kept my face neutral. At 11:30, they emerged from the back of the house. The camera feed showed them walking toward my car. Richard was carrying a toolbox. Victoria had a pair of work gloves in her hand. "Here we go," Torres murmured. I watched my husband crouch beside my car, watched him slide underneath the chassis with familiar ease. He'd grown up working on cars, he'd told me once, a useful skill. Victoria stood guard, checking the street, her body language alert but confident. For 10 minutes, Richard worked on the underside of my car while I sat 3 miles away and watched. At one point, he slid out, said something to Victoria, and they both laughed. He was humming. He was actually humming while he tried to make sure my next drive would be my last. I felt nothing but cold clarity. "That's enough," Torres said into her radio. "All teams, move in, now." On the screen, I watched black SUVs appear at both ends of the street. Agents in tactical gear poured out, weapons drawn. Victoria screamed. Richard scrambled to his feet, covered in grease, eyes wide with shock. "FBI, don't move! Hands where I can see them!" Victoria tried to run. An agent tackled her on the lawn. Richard stood frozen, hands slowly rising, mouth opening and closing like he couldn't process what was happening. I watched them get cuffed, watched them get read their rights, watched Victoria immediately start talking, gesturing at Richard, clearly trying to shift blame. Watched Richard shake his head in denial, even as agents photographed the tools, the brake line, the evidence of his guilt. Agent Torres's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. "It's done." She showed me the text from the team on site. One word, confirmed. I didn't watch the arrest live. I didn't need to. But when that word appeared, confirmed, I felt something I hadn't felt in 8 years. Safe. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My hands, which had been steady for hours, finally started to shake. "Mrs. Carter?" Torres touched my arm. "You okay?" "I'm okay," I said. "I'm okay." And for the first time in longer than I could remember, it was true. Richard was held without bail. The combination of the recorded conspiracy, the video of him tampering with the car, and Victoria's immediate willingness to testify against him made him a flight risk. The judge took one look at the evidence and remanded him to custody pending trial. I didn't visit him. I didn't respond to the letters his lawyer sent. I didn't answer when he tried to call from the detention facility, desperate to understand what had happened. Instead, the morning after his arrest, I put on my best suit, slate gray, impeccably tailored, and walked into the headquarters of Carter Construction. The building was 20 stories of glass and steel in the financial district. Richard's name was on the directory in the lobby. His portrait hung in the executive suite. His vision and leadership were praised in framed press clipping along the hallway. All of that was about to change. The board meeting had been called for 10 a.m. Most of the directors had only received the notice the night before. An emergency session called by major shareholders regarding executive oversight. They didn't know who had called it. They didn't know why. They were about to find out. I walked into the boardroom at exactly 10. 12 faces turned toward me, some confused, some curious, a few vaguely recognizing me as Richard's wife, but not understanding why I was there. Marcus Webb entered behind me, carrying a leather briefcase full of documents. "Good morning," I said, taking the seat at the head of the table. "My name is Danielle Carter. Some of you may know me as Richard Carter's wife. What none of you know is that I am also the majority shareholder of this company." Silence. Then a burst of confused murmuring. "That's impossible," said one of the directors, a heavy-set man named Foster, who'd been on the board since the company's founding. "Richard holds controlling interest. We've seen the shareholder registry." "You've seen what Richard wanted you to see." Marcus began distributing documents. "Over the past 5 years, my client has quietly acquired 51% of Carter Construction through a holding company called Meridian Investments. The acquisitions were completely legal, fully documented, and deliberately kept confidential." I watched the board members flip through the paperwork. Legal confirmations, transfer documents, share certificates, the irrefutable proof of my ownership. "I'm also the primary holder of the company's debt," I continued. "The bank loans, the credit lines, the emergency funding Richard secured 2 years ago. It all flows through entities I control." "Why?" Foster demanded. "Why would you do this behind your own husband's back?" "Because I knew what he was." I met his gaze steadily. "Richard was arrested yesterday for conspiracy to commit murder, my murder specifically. He was planning to kill me, claim the insurance money, and use my father's inheritance to cover the massive fraud he's been perpetrating through this company." More murmuring. Several directors had gone pale. "You'll be receiving full documentation of the criminal charges, along with a forensic accounting report detailing years of embezzlement, bribery, and construction shortcuts that have put lives at risk. I paused, letting that sink in. I'm not here to tear this company down. I'm here to save it, from Richard, and from the consequences of his choices. What exactly are you proposing? Asked a woman at the far end of the table, Patricia Chen, the only director I'd actually researched favorably. First, Richard is removed from all positions, effective immediately. Second, I'm appointing an interim CEO, someone with experience turning around troubled companies. Third, we initiate a full independent audit and compliance review. Fourth, we set aside funds for potential settlements with anyone harmed by Richard's corner cutting. And fifth, we begin the process of rebuilding this company's reputation on a foundation of integrity. One board member sputtered, "You can't just. He built this company." I looked at him calmly. He didn't build it. He broke it. I kept it alive. Now I'm cleaning house. The vote wasn't even close. 11-1 in favor of Richard's removal. The lone holdout was Foster, who stormed out of the room rather than sign the resolution. By noon, security had cleared Richard's office. His portrait had been taken down. His name had been removed from the directory. Carter Construction was mine now, and I was going to make it mean something. The trial was efficient. Richard's lawyer tried every tactic. The recording was obtained improperly. It wasn't. Victoria was an unreliable witness. She wasn't. Richard had been manipulated by a master criminal. The jury didn't believe it. The prosecution presented the audio recording, played for the jury in its entirety. They presented the surveillance video of Richard crawling under my car. They presented Victoria's testimony. She'd taken a deal, 20 years instead of life, in exchange for telling the truth about everything. She was convincing on the stand, cold and clinical, describing in detail how she'd identified Richard as a mark, how she'd cultivated his ego, how she'd suggested the accident plan and let him think it was his idea. She showed no remorse, but she told the truth. The defense's only real strategy was to argue that Richard hadn't actually hurt anyone. The murder hadn't happened. No one had died. The prosecution's response was devastating. They played the video of Richard humming while he sabotaged my brakes. They showed the timeline, the insurance policy increase, the spa reservation, the detailed planning. They proved beyond any doubt that the only reason I was alive was because I'd caught them first. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, attempted murder, insurance fraud, financial fraud. The sentencing hearing was 3 weeks later. The judge was a stern woman named Morrison, who had zero patience for Richard's last-minute attempts at remorse. "You planned to murder your wife of 8 years for money," she said. "You treated her life as a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. You showed no mercy, and you will receive none from this court. 25 years to life. No possibility of parole for 20. I was in the courtroom when the sentence was read. Richard sat at the defense table in his orange jumpsuit, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, deflated, defeated. At one point, he turned around to look at me. Our eyes met for the first time since his arrest. His expression asked, "How?" I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My expression answered clearly enough. "You never knew me at all." The divorce was finalized while Richard sat in a state penitentiary 300 miles upstate. He contested nothing. His lawyer advised him that fighting would only make things worse. The forensic accounting had uncovered enough additional fraud that he was facing potential federal charges on top of everything else. He signed away his rights to the house, to the remaining assets, to any claim on the company he'd once controlled. I kept the brownstone. I kept the investments. I kept the company, now called Meridian Construction, renamed to mark the new beginning. But there was one thing from the marriage I kept that mattered more than any of the rest: the recording. I still have it, stored in a secure location that only Marcus knows about. Not for revenge, not to listen to over and over, just as proof. Proof that I survived. Proof that I saw the truth and acted. Proof that I wasn't the victim Richard tried to make me. 6 months after the trial, I sold Meridian Construction to an ethical development firm that had a genuine commitment to safe construction and community investment. The price was fair. The employees kept their jobs. The legacy of fraud was being systematically corrected. I donated a substantial portion of the proceeds to a foundation for domestic violence prevention and survivor support. They used it to fund emergency housing, legal aid, and financial literacy programs for women trapped in dangerous relationships. I kept enough to live comfortably, to never worry, to never be dependent on anyone again. And I started over, not because I needed to escape the memories. I've made peace with what happened, but because I'd spent 8 years being someone's wife, and I didn't really know who I was when I was just myself. I travel now. I read. I serve on the boards of organizations that do work I believe in. I've reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during the marriage, people Richard had subtly pushed away because they saw through him. I'm happy, genuinely happy, in a way I didn't even realize was possible. Last spring, I visited my father's grave for the first time since Richard's arrest. The cemetery was quiet, dotted with flowers left by other visitors, the grass still damp from morning rain. I sat on the bench beside his headstone and stayed there for a long time. "You saved my life," I said finally. "You knew I needed protection before I did. You set everything up so I'd have options if things went wrong." I paused, watching a robin land on a nearby branch. "I don't know if you suspected Richard specifically. Maybe you just understood the world better than I did then. Either way, thank you. For the money. But more than that, for teaching me to be strong." The wind rustled through the trees. I imagined, just for a moment, that it was his answer. Here's what I learned in those 8 years, and in the months that followed. Trust your instincts. From the very beginning, something inside me knew Richard wasn't what he seemed. I couldn't have articulated it. He was charming, attentive, easy to love, but some deep wisdom recognized the danger before my conscious mind could name it. That instinct saved my life. If something feels wrong, pay attention. Don't explain it away. Don't convince yourself you're being paranoid. You might be the only one seeing clearly. Protect yourself financially. I'm not saying hide assets from your spouse. Healthy relationships are built on transparency. But I am saying, understand your finances. Know where the money is. Have your own accounts, your own credit, your own resources. Never be so dependent on another person that you lose the ability to leave if you need to. My father structured my inheritance specifically to protect me. At the time, I thought it was paranoia. Now I understand it was wisdom. Document everything. The recording I made that night was the single most important piece of evidence in the case against Richard. If I hadn't had the presence of mind to press that button, if I'd confronted him in rage or fear, he might have talked his way out of it. He might have convinced me I'd misheard. He might be free right now. If you're in a situation where you suspect something is wrong, create a paper trail. Save emails, screenshot texts, record conversations if it's legal in your state. You may never need any of it, but if you do, you'll be grateful you have it. Build a network you can trust. I couldn't have done any of this alone. Marcus was my attorney, but he was also my father's friend, someone who cared about my well-being beyond any billable hour. The FBI agents treated me with respect and kept me safe. The new board of the company worked with me to build something better. No one survives alone. Find the people who will stand with you, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. And finally, you are stronger than you know. Richard underestimated me because I let him. I played the role of the supportive wife, the woman who didn't understand finances, the partner who deferred to his judgment. He thought that performance was reality. He was wrong. Underneath the role, I was always watching, always learning, always preparing for the day when I might need to save myself. Most of us never face situations as extreme as mine. I hope you never do. But whatever challenges come your way, know that you have reserves of strength you haven't discovered yet. You have the ability to survive things you can't imagine surviving. You have the capacity to fight when fighting seems impossible. You just have to trust yourself enough to try. The brownstone is different now. I've redecorated completely. New colors, new furniture, new energy. The study where Richard planned my murder is now a library, filled with books my father loved and plants that bloom in the morning light. The bedroom where I lay sleepless beside a stranger has been transformed into a sanctuary, all soft fabrics and calming colors. I live there alone, mostly, but I'm not lonely. Last week I had dinner with Keisha, my college roommate, the one who always said Richard seemed off. She'd been right, of course. She usually is. "You know what still amazes me?" she said, pouring more wine. "The coldness, how you just stood there and recorded it. Most people would have lost their minds." "I almost did," I admitted. There was a moment, listening to them laugh about it, when I wanted to burst in and scream at him, but something stopped me. "What?" I considered the question. I knew that if I confronted him, I'd lose. He'd manipulate me the way he always did. He'd find some explanation, some excuse, and then he'd know that I knew, and he'd accelerate the timeline. I shook my head. The only way to beat someone like Richard is to stay calm, to think 3 steps ahead, to be smarter than they think you're capable of being. "Your dad taught you that?" "He taught me everything." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights through my kitchen window. "So what's next?" Keisha asked eventually. "You've got more money than you'll ever need. No husband, no company to run. What does Danielle Carter do with the rest of her life?" I smiled. "I have a few ideas. I've started writing. Not about Richard specifically, though someday I might, but about money. About power, about the ways women are taught to defer to men on financial matters and how dangerous that can be. About building independence and protecting yourself and trusting your instincts. Someone needs to say these things. Someone needs to tell women that they have the right to understand their own finances, to maintain their own resources, to never be so trapped by love that they can't escape if love turns dangerous. I didn't set out to be that voice, but maybe that's where this story was always leading. Last month, I received a letter from a woman in Ohio. She'd seen a news article about my case, one of the many that ran during the trial, painting me as either a victim or a hero, depending on the publication's angle. She wrote that she'd been in a marriage that scared her, that she'd suspected her husband of things she couldn't prove, that she'd been paralyzed by doubt and fear and economic dependence. After reading about what I'd done, how I'd prepared, how I'd waited, how I'd built my case before making my move, she'd started preparing too. She'd opened her own bank account. She'd copied important documents. She'd reached out to a lawyer. 6 weeks later, she was out. Safe. In a shelter, yes, but safe. And starting to rebuild. I cried when I read that letter. Not from sadness, from something else. Hope, maybe. The sense that what I'd been through might actually mean something beyond my own survival. If you're watching this and something in your gut is telling you something's wrong, listen. You're not paranoid. You might be the only one paying attention. And if this story helped you at all, if it made you think or plan or question something you'd been afraid to question, then everything I went through was worth it. Have you ever caught someone plotting against you, at work, in your family, in a relationship? How did you figure it out? Tell me in the comments, and if this story helped you, subscribe to Karma's Echo, because karma always finds a way.